All right, next up, we're going to talk about a few of the tools. In this class, we generally don't get a mastery of the entire Maxwell software. What we focus on are the ones that are going to get us a suitable result for what we're trying to achieve in terms of representation. So what that means is we're going to focus on materials, lighting, camera in terms of what's happening in the model. And then for output, what we're worried about is obviously all of the image output settings. So resolution, your aspect ratio, that kind of stuff. So outside of that, we don't do too much else. We really try to drill how to make a high quality render with your most basic tools. Okay, but there are some fancy ones that Maxwell has that are pretty cool, like Maxwell C. The cool thing about Maxwell C is it actually creates like an ocean for you, or an ocean looking kind of thing. And then you can use that in any sort of water application. Okay, it's not perfect. It's pretty cool though. All right, so let's take a look at some of them. So what you're going to see here, obviously the way it's configured, or the way I configured it, is you're going to have some of your most basic tools over there on the left side, right? That's kind of like a standard for all software. The button that you see right here is rendering a scene. So that's basically like going up to render and clicking render. You don't really need to use much of this stuff. I mean, we're not going to do any regions or blow-ups. You can open what you do need to know about Maxwell, and it's a feature that we're probably not going to use as much, is that Maxwell is actually a standalone software as well. It doesn't have to be a plugin. So you can pull your model data out and just start working on renderings directly in the Maxwell Studio. And that's kind of what pops up when you do your render. There are a few different ways of doing that, but that's what those are for. And also there's Maxwell Fire. So there are two types of rendering. I don't know what the technical term is for just standard rendering, but it's like taking your processor, your CPU predominantly, and it's just kind of processing the render, and it gives you your static image all good to go. Then there's what runs off of your graphics card, your graphics processor, your GPU, which is generally kind of the thought behind ray trace rendering, which allows you to do more of like a live render. So I don't use that very much because these computers really aren't that great at it, but you can use it if you want to. It's helpful sometimes when you're trying to model something and see how it looks in your rendered environment, but it comes out really grainy and you have to sit for a while and just like wait for it to kind of fully materialize. But it's there if you want to use it. I'll introduce it to you at some point. This panel has a couple of camera features that are pretty useful. We won't get into too many of them right off the bat. You do have the LCD back panel, which is this right here. It gives you some information about your camera settings, but unless you really know what you're looking at, you don't really need that much information. I don't want you guys to have information overload. There's also the heads-up display, which you do need to know about. So if I click on the heads-up display, and we're going to talk about this in great detail later, but what it does is it creates a little, you can't really see it on the projector screen, but it creates a little yellow orangish frame around the active viewport that I'm in. And that's because whatever your active viewport is, that's what's going to render. The information that you're seeing at the top and at the bottom is information about the frame, resolution, and overall size of the image that you're going to render. Okay, so we will get into this in great detail. Balancing your image size and resolution is a really weird thing. So we're going to be probably like 2 or 3 videos we do at some point on just that. It does have autofocus properties, but I will say this, Maxwell's focus features are very difficult to understand. We are going to play with some depth of field stuff, like blurring some stuff out, but you'll find that with full-scale models it becomes incredibly difficult. So you just got to know that when we get there, it's going to be kind of an uphill battle. Okay, now this one is probably going to be the the tool that we spend the most time in. It's the Scene Manager, and it has everything to do with what we're going to be setting up. So I'm going to kind of start talking through the Scene Manager here. And the rest of these tools over here, we're not going to touch them or discuss them until we have to. Okay? The ones that we do touch, which aren't many. Okay? Any questions on the general tools so far? No. Okay, that's good. Hang on a sec. Oops. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the Scene Manager. I'm going to stay high level for now, and we're just going to tell you what each of these tabs are, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty, and I'll tell you about like all the things within these tabs and what they do. Of course, right now the Materials tab doesn't show much because we haven't loaded materials into it. In a professional environment, you're going to have material libraries, some of which are going to be preloaded, some of them are going to be at your disposal to load in afterwards for whatever project. There are also going to be custom materials that you'll create, and we'll do some custom material creation, but we're going to stay very basic. Okay. One thing about materials that I do want to preface about this course, because I know all of you are like foaming at the mouth to do these really awesome, super cool, photorealistic renders, and they're going to look like you just made a Barbie's Malibu beach house, and everyone's going to want to buy it for like $65 million. But the truth is, in the world of academic design, there's really no place for photorealistic renders. It takes way too much time and way too much expertise to get to that level of a rendering. Okay, so in the world of academic design, for a number of reasons, not just the efficiency and all that, you tend to not do photoreal because you don't have that amount of time. And if you start to abstract the model and use maybe simply texture, light, shade, shadow, that kind of stuff, it allows, just like in design, that's the same reason we use like white foam core models all the time, is because the architectural quality of the building and the shape of the building is more important than whatever you use to dress it up on the surface. Does that make sense? Okay, so the majority of our time is going to be spent on, like we'll have some simple colors, and that's why we're working in color palettes, but the majority of our time is going to be spent on, what is in terms of materials, what's a satin surface, what's a glossy surface, matte, textured bump maps, just to get like some roughness on the surface, that kind of stuff. Okay, but we're not going to have any brick patterns. You're not going to do any CMU. Not going to see any asphalt shingles, that kind of stuff. Okay, so just giving you a heads up on that. So anyway, moving across, extensions. We don't really use those in this class, so don't worry about it. Camera. This is one area we're going to spend a whole lot of time on, and you guys are going to get tremendously frustrated with, but that's okay because I'm here to help you work through that frustration. Camera settings get really complicated because, as I said before, they're kind of physically accurate. So you do kind of need to know a little bit about photography. And I'm not a photographer. I've only done renderings. I had an old school camera like once, and all I could do was just change the depth of field on it, and that was about it. But anyway, so we're going to touch this from the digital perspective, and we're going to try to understand it as it relates to the finished product later. Okay. Right here we have location and time. Maxwell does sort of real environment settings and conditions, so you do need sort of I mean, if you're doing any legitimate rendering, you probably want to have an accurate sun angle, right? So you can plug in your location, latitude, longitude, and you can set time of day, all that other stuff. And when you switch over to environment, it doesn't look like much now, but when you switch it over to physical sky, you start getting these things that, probably half of these words you haven't really heard of before. Turbidity, wavelength exposure, reflectance, planet reflectance, asymmetry, ozone, and water. I mean, you've heard the words before, but you don't know what they mean in terms of photography and generating graphics, right? So CGI, right? They do very funny things, and there are some very good rules of thumb that we'll use in order to control our desire to play with those settings too much. But anyway, so that's there for you. There are a lot of settings there. And then output. Output does get quite lengthy. There are a lot of things here. If you scroll your mouse wheel up and down, there isn't a scroll bar on the side of this thing. Just scroll up and down and you'll see that there's a bunch. You know, we'll go through this in detail, but this is everything about how the product is going to spit out. Okay, including naming, you know, some resolution stuff, how long it needs to render for, that kind of stuff. Okay. Any questions on the user interface? 0 questions. Okay, I'm going to Amazon. I'm going to order a Kush ball, and you guys are going to answer some or ask some questions.
When we start doing it, that's when all the questions will come.
What's that?
When we actually start using it, I'm going to ask a lot of questions.
Yeah, that's good. I'm sure.